Welcome to the third part of Chapter 4 lecture. In this section, Part 3 of Chapter 4, we're going to learn the following. We're going to learn to draw a picture of the ear, label its structures and functions, and describe the role they play in hearing. And we're going to be able to describe the process of transduction in hearing. Let's get started. All right, so there are several parameters for hearing, and there are psychological implications of those. But let's just go ahead and talk about them objectively first. And the first one is frequency. And frequency refers to how fast the sound vibrates per second. So when we hear different frequencies, our brain interprets them as different pitches. For example, a low frequency sound vibrates slowly, and this creates a very low pitch, like a deep bass drum or a deep bass guitar sound. In contrast to something with a high frequency, where the sound vibrates very quickly, it creates a very high pitch, like a bird chirping. So the psychological implication of this is that our perception of pitches influences how we interpret and react to sounds. So high-pitched sounds can grab our attention more easily, like a sudden whistle, while low-pitched sounds can create a sense of depth or tension, like thunder rumbling in the distance. The next parameter we'll talk about is wavelength of the sound. So wavelength, again, is the distance between two consecutive peaks or two consecutive troughs, meaning the valleys of a sound wave. This is any wavelength, whether it's radio, light, sound, waves are waves. Short wavelengths, they correspond to high frequencies. So high frequencies have short wavelengths. High frequencies are higher pitch. While long wavelengths, they correspond to low frequencies and low pitch. So the length of the sound wave affects how we perceive its tone and character. You might have heard someone say, I'm trying to get these warm sounds on my radio, on my speaker system, or which that has a specific definition to somebody who's in like an audiophile. And so there is a certain perception of the sound, specifically because of the wavelength of the sound and how we react to it. So again, if you have short, rapid waves, might seem very sharp, or they might seem very piercing, while long waves will be they'll seem slower and deeper, and they'll resonate more. So this impacts how we emotionally respond to music, speech, and environmental sounds. Think of some dramatic piece of music that you like, and think about the different frequencies that are being used, or the different pitches that are being used in the music. And then think of something without words. So think of a song that's more instrumental, so you can focus more on the sound versus lyrics. Now the range of human hearing, this is from as low as 20 hertz to as high as 20 kilohertz or 20,000 hertz. And this is really for young people. As you get older, you start that range starts getting smaller and smaller. 20 hertz is very, very, very low. Deep bass, drum bass sounds on a system, and 20 kilohertz is very, very high. So younger individuals can typically hear those high frequencies better than adults because their hearing is more sensitive, and you lose that sensitivity as you get older in age. Our ability to hear across this range, it affects how we experience the auditory world. So it influences our enjoyment of music, our understanding of speech, and sensitivity to environmental noises. So if you experience hearing loss or changes in sensitivity, this can impact how you communicate and how you express emotion and how you express your well-being just because of your hearing. So you have to understand these parameters, and psychologists will explore these to see how sound influences human behavior, how it influences emotion and cognition. Remember, again, I'm going to always stress behavioral, psychomotor, affective, and cognitive. So you can also use sound frequencies in therapy. Music therapy is something that's not relatively new. but it's, no, I should probably say relatively new. It's not new, but we've used music therapy in helping patients in behavioral hospitals, right? And it's actually it's a field of discipline. So it's a work. You can go work in this field if you wanted to as a musician, work with patients and play music. Music can affect your mood, your stress levels. Think of if any of you like to work out, right? And you have a certain type of music that actually gets you pumping and it makes you want to lift weights, or if you're running, whether you're running alone early in the morning or you're running in the afternoon and there's traffic, there might be a particular type of music that actually sets the mood for that. So music does have a strong impact in how we interact with the world or how we interact with our close environment and how we accomplish our tasks. So our ability to perceive and interpret pitch and frequency, this plays a crucial role in our communication, our language development, and our overall sensory experience of the world. Okay. Let's talk about amplitude and loudness. So amplitude refers to the height or intensity of a sound wave. So it represents how much energy the wave carries. So a larger amplitude means the sound wave is more intense, while a smaller amplitude means it's less intense. So what amplitude will determine or help us determine is how loud a sound is perceived. So louder sounds with higher amplitudes, these actually can invoke stronger emotional responses, such as excitement or fear. Think of a song that really drives you to do something active. And then think of other sounds like a sudden crash or a thunderclap or yeah, something that startles you, right? If you're walking alone home at night, it's leaves everywhere and it's just you, and you can hear the rustling of the leaves, and all of a sudden you hear a lot of leaves moving very, very fast. And it may not be very intense, but compared to the environment, it is, right? It's very, very intense to you. Loudness, this is the perception of the intensity or volume of a sound by our ears and our brain. So it does depend on the amplitude of the sound wave. Larger amplitudes, they typically result in louder sounds, while smaller amplitudes result in quieter sounds. And the implication here is that loudness influences our mood and our attention. You may have seen this in TV shows where a teenager comes home, they're arguing with the parents, they run up the stairs and they say, "You don't understand me," and then they slam the door and they crank up the music and blast it, whatever it is. It's like something that's been going on ever since we've learned how to record music and play it at home. So yeah, loudness can affect your mood. It can affect your attention. It can affect your stress levels. If used appropriately, it can help you reduce your stress levels. If you use it incorrectly, it can actually add to your stress levels. High volume environments like a crowded party or a noisy room, this can affect your ability to concentrate or relax. Not for everybody. I know some people who love hectic environments. Like, for example, fast food restaurants. I knew someone who loved working at fast food restaurants because there was so much going on, and they just loved moving around. It was very relaxing for them. As long as they were moving and doing something, they could, all the noise, everything moving around, it sort of synced in. They learned how to utilize all that to become very effective there. As for me, if I was working in a place that was that loud, I wouldn't appreciate it as much as my friend would have. So I would like something that's a little bit more soothing, moderate volume, soft music. Some of you might connect with this. Listening to the rain, gentle rain. There's lots of YouTube videos. It's just nothing but rain. The fireplace video on YouTube, you'll see this in Christmas time. is just background noise. It's very constant, it's very broad, and it promotes this relaxation. It's just in the background, nothing very specific. And people will have those being played in the background to improve their peace and their calmness. Now, I've heard of this, we've heard of white noise, and we know what that is. I've recently seen videos on something called green noise, and it's a different frequency, and the videos on YouTube always start off with this noise will actually help you sleep, help you relax, and it's like the specific types of sounds will impact your behavior and your well-being. So I've listened to it, and I do like that kind of background noise. It reminds me of the ocean, actually. And I think it's called green noise. And it kind of reminds me of that. If you're ever at the beach at night, there's no one there, or not that there's no one there, but it's just quiet and everyone's quiet, and all you hear is the ocean and the water constantly moving in. That's what that green noise sounds like to me, and it's very relaxing. But if you're exposed to like excessive noises, like over time, like you're in an urban environment or workplaces with loud machinery, all of this can lead to stress. It leads to fatigue. It even leads to hearing damage. I mentioned in the previous lecture about alarm fatigue that happens in healthcare, where clinicians who constantly are surrounded by medical device alarms, where they become fatigued and they start actually blocking these out. They could actually be in the room, the alarm could be going out, and you think they're ignoring the alarm. They are to an extent where they don't realize the alarm's going off because they hear it all the time. It's not hearing damage, it's where their mind has sort of compensated to block it out because it's creating stress, which is part of the real thing we need to be looking at as clinical engineers, that if alarm fatigue is actually occurring in hospitals, that the root cause is clinicians, nurses are blocking it out because it's they're compensating for alleviating stress in the environment, and we should probably think of a better way to not stress out the clinicians. So again, sound therapy, that can be used for promoting relaxation, helping reduce anxiety. There's got to be something we can do with alarms in the medical field to help out clinicians so that they won't be moved from a productive psychological state to a stressful psychological state. There might be something there where medical error does occur because of all those noises and the alarm fatigue that's been going on and being observed and noted in healthcare. Just an idea for a discussion. The decibel, this you might have learned from your math class. So it's a unit. It's used to measure the intensity or loudness of sound. You've heard of this, or you've read this unit before. Every time you buy a pair of headphones or speakers or anything that has to do with power or sound or loudness, right, on the packaging it'll tell you what the ratings are in decibels. So the higher the decibel level, the louder the sound. Right? So if some of you just buy something based on price and you don't look at the decibels, what you might want to do is do a comparison, and that's something quantitative that you can look at to know what you're getting for your money. The implication here with decibels is that it helps us understand how loud noises can affect our emotions and behaviors. So for example, if you experience a sudden loud noise like a fire alarm or a car horn, that can trigger that fight or flight response, and it causes us to react quickly, and it causes us to feel anxious and startled. Now I don't know if I mentioned this before, on my Alexa, which is my alarm clock, I use it as an alarm clock, there is a feature that allows Alexa to actually wake you up with these very annoying personalities, right? And it works because it is sudden, they are annoying, and they do irritate me in the morning. I don't stay irritated the rest of the day, but it does its job where I do not go back to sleep after hearing that. So it works really good. It startles me every single time, and it's random. There's several different voices, and Alexa will play different ones. Yeah, and so I react to that every morning. I don't know if that's good or not, or good or bad, but yeah, I should probably go to the doctor and have my heart checked out and see what I'm doing to myself as far as torture with that alarm system. We talked about the human hearing range, right? So the human ear can comfortably hear sounds ranging from very, very soft, about 0 dB. 0 dB doesn't mean like no sound. Again, the dB is a ratio. So 0 dB is about the loudness of a whisper to something moderately loud, which is like 80 dB. And that's like your typical middle of the city rush hour traffic, or like your vacuum cleaner. Anything above that, you start experiencing hearing loss. So in other words, it starts causing damage to the ear. So if you're working for a company, you're required to provide hearing protection for individuals who are in an environment like that, and they can't leave. I don't mean temporarily where they walk in and out of an environment, but that's their environment of work. The implication here is that our ability to hear across this range, it impacts how we communicate, which means it impacts everything else, how we learn, how we experience the world. And so hearing loss, which can result from prolonged exposure to sounds above 80 dB. Think about a manufacturing plant where you have all this machinery going on, loud noises, and you're exposed to that for very long periods of time, and you don't use hearing protection. Right? This can actually affect your social interactions. It'll actually affect your moods, and it does affect your overall quality of life. There's a lot of research that already points to this. So it's not just that you can't hear. It affects the way you communicate. So let's talk about hearing loss. Right? So if you're working in an industrial area, which is where you'll most likely find loud machinery, and you have prolonged exposure to sounds above 80 decibels, this can cause damage to the sensitive hair cells that are in your inner ear. And once those hair cells are damaged, they don't recover, right? And so what ends up happening is you lose enough of them, you start losing hearing over time. And this happens gradually, so it doesn't happen immediately. But at some point you will notice that you couldn't hear things as well. Maybe you're a professor and you're talking to students and they're talking at a normal range, but because of your age and your exposure to loud noises, you're asking students to repeat themselves because you can't hear what they're saying. You may think they're talking low, but they could be talking at a normal level. So you don't notice it until you experience it. And the implication here is that, again, hearing loss will affect your self-esteem, and you don't want to be, or I don't want to be in that situation where I realize, oh shoot, I'm experiencing hearing loss, and the word hearing aid gets thrown around. You don't feel very, very good about yourself. You start losing self-esteem. It does affect your relationships. You start perceiving that people think of you differently. Again, that's only your own perception, and all that affects your mental health. So it causes things like frustration, isolation. It causes difficulty in just normal interactions, social situations, either at work or at nightlife, I guess. So you have to protect your ears from loud noises. So it's important to use hearing protection in noisy environments if you want to maintain healthy hearing, and healthy hearing is linked to well-being. Now remember that the Industrial Revolution didn't really happen until about 100 and something years ago. Before that, we didn't really have a lot of loud noises. So our body has not developed enough to through generations to sort of compensate for that and develop some kind of mechanism to protect our hearing. So this all happened very, very rapidly. The rate at which technology actually is discovered and implemented in society sort of affects the society's ability not just to adapt to new technologies, but to evolve to where they would normally evolve. So think about the technologies. I'm going off topic a little bit, but think about the technologies that we have in the recent 20 years, where before that, it was just a generation ago where people were used to talking to each other, calling each other on the phone. Texting was something cumbersome, right? So you couldn't just text sentences. You had to do everything in shorthand. So phone calls and calling and communicating was still normal. And then smartphones came out, and then we could do all these other things. And it really did affect our ability to encompass that technology in our society. So it overwhelmed us, I would say. These are typical decibel levels for common sounds. I remember 0, we call that the absolute threshold. This is when someone is just whispering something very softly in your ear. Breathing is about 10 dB. We can handle that very easily. However, I have heard frequently that as you get married, your partner's breathing passes that absolute threshold, and you need hearing protection because of their breathing. And I've heard this on TV shows, and it's usually from couples who are married. They're breathing. I can hear them breathing, and so it becomes not physical hearing loss damage, but maybe something in the brain that interprets the sound waves, where you start developing some kind of damage. A ticking watch is about 20 dB. Again, a whisper here. We have whisper at about 30 dB, but you can whisper even lower than that. Your refrigerator is around 40 dB, a good working refrigerator, not one that's broken. If you go to a store and you hear a really loud clanking sound from one of their in-store refrigerators, where they got all the drinks, that thing is not at 40 dB. Your air conditioner should be around 60. I had a friend who just bought a brand new air conditioner because her last one was going out, and that thing was very, very loud. She wasn't sure if it was her or if that's the way it was supposed to sound. And I reminded her that there are dB meters that you can download at apps on your phone, and so she did. She downloaded one, and it was above 80 for sure. It was 80 something. And I said, well, yeah, that is definitely inside the house. That's how loud it was actually projecting the noise inside the house. And so she called the tech back. I think she called him originally, and it seemed like he didn't want to come back. Kind of just saying, well, that's just the way it is. And so now she had quantitative data, and she's like, yeah, that thing is, it was well above the need for hearing protection. And so she called back with the information, with the measurements, and it ended up that, yeah, one of the speeds of the fan was too high, and so it was actually making a lot of noise. So they lowered that speed, and everything worked fine. Okay, I won't go into too much detail with all these other things, and again, I won't go into too much disease. City traffic, that's something we all experience. Gas-powered lawnmowers, leaf blowers, that's 80 to 85 decibels. So if you're out there cutting the grass and you're cutting it for a while, 2 hours, you have time. This is the time that it would take for you to develop permanent hearing loss. Driving your motorcycle, again, 95 dB. If you're riding your motorcycle for more than 50 minutes, you're not wearing a helmet. And again, wearing a helmet is not just for protecting your head, your cranium, but it's also to help protect those ears. You should always wear a helmet when you're riding a motorcycle. I can't stress that enough. You start losing your hearing. Those individuals who buy those extremely loud mufflers on purpose, now they do it for a reason. They do it because, well, the correct reason, I guess the logical reason they get those extremely loud mufflers is so that cars will notice them in the highway and they won't get run over by automobiles. So it is like a safety precaution of why they actually have those loud mufflers. But it actually also is extremely loud, and I see them riding with those very, very loud mufflers, and also with no helmet. All right, so that's terrible. And I'll just stop here with the high volume of music. A lot of people, I should say people, they listen to music through the earbuds, those headphones. And the average sound would be around 105, 110 dB. Now, this is probably the max on one of those headphones. These are probably very good headphones that are 105, 110 dB. Most of the cheap ones I buy at Ross are kind of like in the high 90s, 93 or something, 98. So for me, I'm thinking that's perfect. I never want it to be too high because I don't want to purposefully damage my ears. So if I buy a cheaper pair of headphones and it only has like a 93 dB rating for sound level, it's like I'm fine with that because I don't need earbuds to be blasting anything even at that level. Again, you listen to that for more than 5 minutes, you're causing permanent hearing damage. So earbuds, well, we talked about that threshold detection in the last lecture. Again, just a bit of advice. Go, if you're listening to it when you're walking in the grocery store, and this is my example because I do this a lot. I'll go into the grocery store and I'll put on the earbuds. And if you crank them up, if you put it on and put the music on while you're in your car where it's super quiet and you crank it up to something that you think is comfortable, it's going to be too loud. And then once you get into the store, that distraction is going to make it seem like you need to crank up the volume a little more so you can drown out the ambient noise. But if you wait till you get into the store and have the volume all the way down to 0, the minute you get into the store, you hear all the background noise, people talking, moving, and everything, and you start cranking up the volume just slowly till you can barely hear it, and then just go a few notches above that, you'll be able to hear it actually very fine. You'll get accustomed to hearing that volume. You'll be able to hear your podcast, your music, or whatever it is, and your ears will tune to that, and you'll also be able to block out the outside noise that way. And then you won't damage your ears. So it's just a little bit of, I won't say advice, but a little something to try. Don't put your headphones on before you get into the environment where you're going to listen to the music. Right? Put them on and listen to, or turn them on in the environment and then adjust it then. All right, let's continue with the anatomy of the ear. So let's talk about the outer ear and the auditory canal. So again, when sound waves, like someone's voice or music, it enters the ear, it first goes through the outer ear, which includes the part of the ear flap that you can see, right? And the ear canal. So it captures the sound waves. Think about a radio telescope, that big old dish that captures radio waves. Don't make fun of people with big ears because they can probably capture more sound than you would if you have smaller ears. Anyway, I won't make jokes about people with big ears. I have big ears. So what happens is the sound waves, they travel right to the flap, they go through the canal, and kind of like water through a hose, it just flows through that ear canal. There's an eardrum at the very end of that auditory canal, and it's this very, very thin, sensitive membrane. So when sound waves reach that eardrum, and sound waves are mechanical waves or pressure waves in our atmosphere, so they vibrate, and just like when you hit a drum, if you ever play drums, you hit the drum and it vibrates, and it causes the air around it to vibrate, and it sends mechanical waves, mechanical energy through the air. Well, when sound waves hit that eardrum, that side of it that's exposed to the outer ear vibrates. But on the other side of that eardrum, it's actually connected to these things called the ossicles and the cochlea. So as that membrane is vibrating, the vibrations from the eardrum, they move through the middle ear, and those three bones, which we call the ossicles, they act like a chain, and they help amplify or to make louder the vibrations. Think about a good way to explain it is if you ever tap a quarter on concrete next to a swimming pool, right? And you can hear the noise, but then you go under the water, and now you have this this medium that actually will transfer that vibration much quicker and it'll amplify the sound. So then you tap that quarter, or somebody taps a quarter on the concrete while you're underwater, right? That sounds very, very loud. So that's kind of what's happening across that membrane in the ear canal. That it gets amplified, the vibrations they move into this snail-shaped part of the inner ear, and we call that the cochlea. Inside that cochlea, there are these hair cells. They're not hair cells, but they're sensors, and they're connected to the auditory nerve. And so inside that cochlea, there's these thousands of tiny little follicles. We say hair cells, but don't get them confused with like your hair. And what happens is the cells, they detect the vibrations, they turn them into electrical signals. The signals are sent to the auditory nerve, and this whole thing acts like a messenger. It carries that signal from your ear to the brain, where that information gets processed. So when you hear something, it's really a journey of a sound wave traveling through your ear canal, making your eardrum vibrate, passes through those tiny bones, gets amplified within that fluid sac there. It moves those hair cells in there, goes to the cochlea, and then it gets sent to the brain. And all of that just so we can hear people say, howdy neighbor, or good howdy partner. We're in Texas, so yeah. This is just a pictorial representation of sound going through the ear canal. So it says it starts off with the pin, and that's just the outside of the ear, right, where sound gets drawn in. Sound waves strike that tympanic membrane inside the ear canal. Vibrations relate through the ossicles. It goes to this what's called an oval window that vibrates. Then it actually causes the fluid inside the cochlea to move in and out, or to vibrate, which actually will cause those hair cells to actually bend. And the bending of those hair cells will actually create signals corresponding to the sound waves in intensity that your brain gets and interprets. So what do we really hear? What do we really see, right? The brain's doing everything for us. We'll talk about two concepts here: place theory of hearing and the frequency theory of hearing. Right? So the place theory of hearing, this suggests that different parts of the cochlea, that spiral-shaped organ in the inner ear, that it responds to different frequencies in sound. So in other words, specific locations along the cochlea are sensitive to specific pitches or frequencies of sound waves. So when high frequency sounds enter the ear canal, they cause vibrations in one part of the cochlea, and then the lower frequency sounds cause vibrations in another part. So that's the place theory of hearing. The implication of this to psychology is that it helps explain how we perceive different pitches or tones in sounds. So it shows that our brain can determine the pitch of a sound based on which part of the cochlea is actually most active. So we try to understand how the ear physically breaks down the processes of sound, and psychologists will study this and they'll look at how we perceive and interpret music, language, and other environmental sounds. The other theory is called frequency theory of hearing, and this is also known as temporal theory. And what this theory proposes is that the frequency of a sound wave directly corresponds to the rate at which those nerve impulses, those electrical signals, are sent to the auditory nerve. So this means that if a sound wave vibrates at 1,000 hertz per second, cycles per second, or 1 kilohertz, the nerve cells fire at 1,000 times per second, and that matches the frequency. And this is called frequency theory. The implication of this to psychology is that this theory emphasizes, again, how our brain interprets pitch of sounds and based on the frequency of nerve impulses that are sent to it. And it, again, would also help us understand rhythm and timing of sounds, how we interpret rhythm and timing. Yeah, so understanding these theories will give psychologists better insight into how our ears and brains work together, and how we process sounds and how we perceive the world around us. Yeah, I'm really kind of liking the idea of doing a discussion on alarm fatigue for this particular chapter. I think I've got the discussion for this chapter, alarm fatigue, because it'll involve a lot of this. Okay, let's talk about two losses, two types of hearing losses: conductive hearing loss and sensorineural hearing loss. All right, two different types of hearing loss. Conductive hearing loss, this occurs because there's a problem conducting sound waves in the outer ear to the eardrum or to the middle ear. And this could be due to issues like earwax buildup, right, which acts like a natural earplug, or fluid in the middle ear that's accumulated from an infection, which you can't hear very well. You may have a perforated eardrum, or you may have problems with those tiny little bones in the ear ossicles. And what psychologists will do is they'll look at people with conductive hearing loss, and they'll try to study the difficulties they have in hearing, say, soft sounds or understanding speech. And again, contrast this with especially noisy environments, and look to see how this leads to things like frustration. It may even lead to things like social withdrawal. If someone can't hear others very well, they may not want to be around people. It may not be that they don't like people, it's just like they're feeling very uncomfortable. They're feeling very withdrawn, not connected, all because of hearing loss. Again, what a psychologist will do is they'll work with individuals with conductive hearing loss to address those challenges, and they'll provide strategies for how to cope with it, right? You'll see another doctor who actually helps you hear better, prescribe you a hearing aid. But until then, psychologists will, again, we're dealing with the mind, tell you how to cope with these kinds of things. The other one, sensory neural hearing loss. This is where hearing loss occurs when there's damage to the inner ear, inside the cochlea itself. So in this case, hearing aid is not going to help. Hearing aid just amplifies sound. People get cochlear implants for this. So remember, the cochlea is that place where the nerve pathways from the inner ear go to the brain, the auditory nerve. And so when you have this type of hearing loss, it can be caused by, dare I say, aging, exposure, constant exposure to loud noise. It could be some genetic factors. You could also have infections. These are very serious things. In pharmacy, where we were getting patients with ear infection medication, and they had something else, maybe they were being prescribed something for pain, and they could only afford one, and they kind of asked us, like, which one should I take? What do you think is more important? And you know, we kind of gave them some of that advice, like, if you can manage the pain, it's better to fight that ear infection, because you don't want to get permanent hearing loss, because that will not come back. And so, yeah, so we had to give advice like that to patients. And again, I worked in a pharmacy where patients were economically challenged. Right? So, but when you have sensory neural hearing loss, it affects the ability to hear very faint sounds. It affects your ability to understand speech clearly, even when it's loud. So it impacts how sounds are perceived. So it makes some frequencies harder to hear than others. And what a psychologist will do with an individual with this type of hearing loss is work with them and how to use their hearing aids or assistive devices to kind of cope with that communication challenge. Again, we're dealing with the individual, not we, psychologists. I don't work with patients in psychology. I just work with employees. But when you're dealing with these types of patients, you're dealing with their emotional impacts, their frustrations, isolation that has to deal with this type of hearing loss, this challenge. So it's important to understand hearing loss. It's important to understand for psychologists so they can provide some kind of coping strategy, so that although they already have this impairment, that they don't have a cognitive or affective impairment as well that will exacerbate their situation. It's enough to have hearing loss, but if you feel bad about it and you think these negative things about it, it's going to compound the problem. All right, takeaways. Again, I said I won't read the takeaways. You can read this. I pause there so you can read without me talking, and I'll do the same thing with the next one. All right, the last takeaway right there. You can read this, and they're on your slides. I want to thank you very much for attending this session. These are very long lectures, which is why I'm recording them. There's no way we'd get through this in a 2-hour class, especially if we have guest speakers. and so forth, there's no way I'd get through all this material. So thank you very much for your patience, and I will talk to you on the next presentation.